My name is Janet Sullivan, and I am 62 years old. 3 years ago, I lost my husband Robert to cancer after 41 years of marriage. The house we shared in the city felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that made my heart ache every morning when I woke up alone. That is when I discovered Willowbrook Estates. The moment I drove through those pristine entrance gates, I felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. The neighborhood looked like something from a magazine. Every lawn was perfectly manicured. Every house was painted in approved earth tones. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks that looked like they had been power washed that morning. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Susan, walked me through the community rules with a bright smile. "The HOA here maintains excellent standards," she explained as we toured my future home. "Nothing too restrictive, just basic guidelines to protect property values. You will love how peaceful it is here." I bought the house within a week. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a small front yard and a perfect view of the community park from my kitchen window. For the first time since Robert died, I felt like I might be able to build something new, something that was just mine. The first few months were exactly what Susan had promised: peaceful. My neighbors waved when they saw me working in my small front garden. Mrs. Chen from next door brought me homemade cookies. The mailman, Tom, always stopped to chat about the weather. I felt like I belonged somewhere again. I started making small improvements to make the place feel like home. I planted a border of colorful flowers along my front walkway. Nothing fancy, just marigolds and petunias that reminded me of the garden Robert and I had tended together. I hung a simple bird feeder from the oak tree in my front yard and put out a welcome mat with a cheerful sunflower design. These were not grand gestures. They were the small touches that turn a house into a home, or so I thought. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. It was in my mailbox, tucked between the electric bill and a grocery store circular. The return address read Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association in official-looking letters. I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, expecting maybe a newsletter or a reminder about community events. Instead, I found a formal violation notice. The letter was typed on official letterhead and signed by someone named Karen Mitchell, HOA president. "Dear homeowner," it began, "it has come to our attention that your property contains unauthorized decorative elements that violate Section 4.2 of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowner Agreement. Specifically, decorative stones and non-approved plant varieties in your front landscaping area." I read the letter 3 times before it sank in. Decorative stones. I looked out my window at the small river rocks I had placed around my flower bed. They were natural gray stones, nothing flashy or unusual. Non-approved plant varieties. My marigolds and petunias looked exactly like the flowers in half the yards on my street. The letter gave me 14 days to remedy these violations or face progressive enforcement action, including monetary penalties. I spent that afternoon walking through the neighborhood, really looking at other people's landscaping for the first time. I saw river rocks identical to mine. I saw marigolds, petunias, even some more exotic flowers that I had not dared to plant. The only difference I could see was that my garden was newer, brighter, more carefully tended than most. That night, I removed every single decorative stone from my flower bed. I felt foolish doing it, but I wanted to be a good neighbor. I wanted to follow the rules. I had no idea that following the rules would never be enough for Corinne Mitchell. 3 days after I removed the stones, she came to my door. Corinne Mitchell did not come alone. She brought 2 other people with her, a thin man in a cheap suit and a woman with a smartphone who started taking pictures of my house the moment they stepped onto my property. I answered the door expecting friendly neighbors, maybe someone to welcome me properly to the community. Instead, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a corporate boardroom. Corinne was probably in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked professionally applied. She wore a navy blue blazer and carried a leather portfolio that she clutched like a weapon. "Mrs. Sullivan, I presume," she said without offering her hand or a smile. "I am Corinne Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. These are board members David Chen and Patricia Williams. We need to discuss your ongoing compliance issues." Ongoing compliance issues. I had removed the stones exactly as the letter requested. "I took care of the landscaping," I said, confused. "I removed all the decorative stones." Corinne opened her portfolio and pulled out a digital camera. She showed me the screen, which displayed a close-up photo of my bird feeder. "This structure was not mentioned in your previous violation notice because it represents a separate category of infraction. Section 6.1 clearly states that decorative yard fixtures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation." I stared at the tiny bird feeder hanging from my oak tree. It was wooden, painted forest green, and no bigger than a shoebox. "It is just a bird feeder," I said weakly. "Unauthorized fixtures that attract nuisance wildlife," Patricia Williams chimed in, reading from her own clipboard. "Birds create droppings, noise disturbances, and potential pest problems for neighboring properties." David Chen pointed at my welcome mat. "That decorative floor covering also appears to contain non-approved color schemes. Our standards specify earth tones only. That sunflower design incorporates yellow and orange, which fall outside acceptable parameters." I felt like I was in some kind of absurd dream. These people were standing on my porch, treating my bird feeder and welcome mat like serious crimes. "I am sorry," I managed to say. "I did not know about these rules. I can remove them if that is what you need." Corinne's expression did not soften. If anything, she looked more stern. "Mrs. Sullivan, ignorance of clearly stated community standards is not an acceptable excuse. Every homeowner receives a complete copy of our covenant restrictions at closing. Compliance is not optional." I tried to explain my situation, hoping to appeal to whatever human decency these people might have. "I am a widow, Mrs. Mitchell. I moved here after my husband passed away, looking for a peaceful place to start over. I am not trying to cause problems. I just want to fit in and be a good neighbor." Corinne looked at me like I had just told her the most boring story she had ever heard. "Personal circumstances do not create exceptions to community standards, Mrs. Sullivan. Our rules apply equally to all residents regardless of their individual situations." The way she said it with such casual coldness made my stomach turn. This woman did not care that I was grieving, that I was alone, that I was trying my best to follow rules I barely understood. She cared about power, about control, about making sure I knew exactly who was in charge in this neighborhood. "You have 48 hours to remove the unauthorized bird feeder and replace the non-compliant welcome mat," Corinne continued, making notes in her portfolio. "Failure to comply will result in a $50 fine for each day the violations remain uncorrected." $50 a day. I was living on Social Security and a small pension from Robert's job. $50 was groceries for a week. After that, Corinne added with what I swear was satisfaction in her voice, "fines escalate to $100 per day, then $250 per day, until full compliance is achieved. We also reserve the right to place liens on non-compliant properties if fines exceed $500. I watched them walk back to Corinne's white Mercedes SUV, taking more pictures of my house as they went. My hands were shaking as I closed the door. I leaned against it and tried to process what had just happened. This was not about community standards or property values. This was about a bully who had found her perfect victim, a widow with no backup, limited resources, and an obvious desire to avoid conflict. I had no idea how much worse it was going to get. I removed the bird feeder that same afternoon. I drove to 3 different stores looking for an earth-toned welcome mat and finally found a plain brown one that looked like something from a military barracks. I hoped that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next violation notice arrived 4 days later. This time, it was about my mailbox numbers. According to the letter, the font was non-standard and needed to be replaced with approved Arial numerals in bronze finish only. The fine was already in effect, $50. I stared at my mailbox numbers, trying to figure out what was wrong with them. They were simple black numbers, the same style I had seen on half the mailboxes in the neighborhood. But Corinne had decided mine were wrong, so mine were wrong. The pattern became clear over the following weeks. Every time I fixed one violation, Corinne found 2 more. My trash can was visible from the street for longer than the permitted time after pickup. Another $50 fine. My grass was 1/4 inch too long in one section of my front yard. Another fine. A small garden hose was visible from my front window. Another fine. The phone calls started in November. Corinne would call at 7 in the morning or 9 at night, always with the same crisp, professional tone. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Corinne Mitchell with the HOA. I am calling to inform you of a new violation observed during today's compliance inspection." Compliance inspection. She was driving by my house every single day, looking for new things to complain about. I started closing my curtains and avoiding my front yard, but it did not matter. Corinne found violations I never would have imagined. My Christmas wreath was up for excessive duration because I left it hanging for 3 days after Christmas. My newspaper sat in my driveway for longer than the permitted 6-hour window because I had been at a doctor's appointment. A small potted plant on my front steps was categorized as unauthorized container gardening. The fines piled up faster than I could pay them. $50 became $100 became $250 per violation. I was choosing between groceries and HOA fines. I stopped buying meat and started living on rice and beans and whatever was on sale at the discount grocery store. My neighbors noticed what was happening, but they were too afraid to help. Mrs. Chen still waved, but she no longer stopped to chat. Tom the mailman gave me sympathetic looks but never said anything directly. A few neighbors whispered support when Corinne was not around. She did the same thing to the Johnsons. One neighbor told me quietly while we both waited at the grocery store checkout. They ended up selling their house and moving away. She has her favorites and her targets, and once you are a target, you are done. "Why does not anyone stop her?" I asked. The neighbor looked around nervously. "Because she controls the board. She decides who gets violations and who gets warnings. Cross her, and your house becomes the next target." I realized I was living in a dictatorship. Corinne Mitchell had created her own little kingdom where she could destroy people's lives over mailbox fonts and bird feeders, and everyone was too scared to challenge her because they might be next. The breaking point came on a gray February morning when I found the certified letter in my mailbox. My hands were shaking as I signed for it, knowing it could not be good news. The postal worker gave me a pitying look as he handed it over. Notice of intent to file property lien, the letter began in bold letters. Due to accumulated violations totaling $1,247 in unpaid fines and penalties, the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association hereby provides 30-day notice of intent to file a lien against the property located at. I sat down hard on my front steps, reading the letter over and over. A lien on my house. The house that represented everything I had left after Robert died. The house I had bought with the insurance money from his death, thinking I could start fresh and build something new. Karen Mitchell was trying to take my home because my mailbox numbers were the wrong font. I looked around at my neighborhood, at the perfect lawns and approved earth-toned houses, and realized I was trapped. I did not have $1,247. I could not afford to move. I could not afford to fight, and Karen knew it. She had found the perfect victim, and she was going to squeeze until there was nothing left. By March, I was living on $15 a week for groceries. The HOA fines had consumed my small savings account and most of my monthly Social Security check. I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and skipping meals entirely some days. My blood pressure medication cost more than I was spending on food. That is when Karen delivered the killing blow. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by Karen herself. I watched from my kitchen window as she walked up my driveway, placed the envelope in my door handle, and took several photographs of my front yard before leaving. My stomach clenched with dread as I opened it. Immediate compliance required, the header screamed in red letters. The Memorial Garden area in your front landscaping violates Section 4.7 regarding unauthorized commemorative displays. All decorative elements, including stone borders, commemorative plantings, and memorial items, must be removed within 72 hours or face immediate fine escalation and possible legal action. The Memorial Garden, the small area where I had planted Robert's favorite roses and placed a simple stone marker with his initials. The only place in this entire neighborhood that felt like home, like love, like the life we had built together. She wanted me to destroy it. I collapsed into my kitchen chair and wept, not just tears, but the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from the deepest part of your soul. Karen was not just attacking my house anymore. She was attacking my grief, my love, my memories. She wanted to erase the last physical connection I had to my husband. That evening, I decided to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. I had avoided them before, intimidated by the formal atmosphere and legal language. But this time, I was desperate. Maybe if I could explain in person, maybe if the other board members could see how much this was hurting me, maybe someone would show mercy. The meeting was held in the community center conference room. Karen sat at the head of a long table with 4 other board members flanking her. About 15 homeowners sat in folding chairs facing them. The whole setup felt like a courtroom where I was already guilty. When they reached homeowner concerns on the agenda, I raised my shaking hand. Karen looked at me with what I can only describe as predatory satisfaction. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said in a voice that carried across the entire room, "I assume you are here to discuss your ongoing compliance issues." I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "Please," I said, and my voice cracked on the word. "The memorial garden you want me to remove, it is for my husband. He died 3 years ago. Those roses were his favorites. I am not trying to break any rules. I just want to keep something that reminds me of him." The room was silent. I could feel the other homeowners looking at me with pity and embarrassment. Some of them were probably thinking about their own small rule violations, grateful it was me up there and not them. Corinne did not even blink. Mrs. Sullivan, as I have explained multiple times, personal circumstances do not create exceptions to community standards. The memorial garden violates clearly stated landscaping restrictions. It must be removed. But other people have decorative landscaping, I said, my voice getting louder and more desperate. The Hendersons have a fountain. The Millers have decorative lighting. Why is my small garden different? Those items were approved through proper channels, Corinne replied coldly. Your installation was unauthorized. The violation stands. I felt something break inside me at that moment, some last shred of dignity or hope or fight. I am a widow living on Social Security, I said, and I was crying now in front of everyone. I moved here to find peace after losing my husband. I have paid over $1,000 in fines for things like mailbox fonts and welcome mats. Please, just let me keep this one small thing. Corinne looked at me like I was something unpleasant she had found on her shoe. Mrs. Sullivan, if you cannot afford to maintain compliance with community standards, perhaps you should consider whether Willowbrook Estates is the right fit for your current circumstances. The message was clear. Get out, leave, go somewhere else to be poor and broken and grief-stricken. I sat down and said nothing else for the rest of the meeting. When it ended, Corinne approached me with a satisfied smile. Mrs. Sullivan, I trust we will see full compliance with the Memorial Garden violation by Friday. The alternative is a $500 immediate fine and acceleration of the lien process. That night, I called Marcus. My son was deployed somewhere in the Middle East, serving his second tour as a Marine infantry sergeant. I had not wanted to burden him with my problems, not when he was dealing with life-and-death situations on the other side of the world. But I was out of options. Mom, his voice sounded so far away through the satellite connection. What is wrong? You sound terrible. And I told him everything. About Corinne, about the fines, about the memorial garden, about the lien on the house. I cried into the phone like a broken woman, which is exactly what I was. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then Marcus spoke, and his voice was different, colder, harder. Mom, he said quietly, do not touch Dad's garden. Do not pay another dime in fines. Do not let them intimidate you. I am coming home. I did not believe Marcus could actually come home. He was deployed in an active combat zone, and family problems did not usually qualify for emergency leave. But 6 days later, I heard a car door slam in my driveway and looked out to see my son walking toward my front door. He was still in his dress blue uniform, probably having come straight from the airport. At 28 years old, Marcus was everything his father had been and more. 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and military bearing, with Robert's dark eyes and my stubborn jaw. But there was something different about him now, something I had not seen in the boy who left for the Marines 10 years ago. He looked dangerous. Mom, he said as he wrapped me in a hug that felt like safety for the first time in months, show me everything. For the next 3 hours, I walked Marcus through the entire nightmare. I showed him every violation notice, every fine, every threatening letter. I explained about Corinne's daily surveillance, the phone calls, the escalating penalties. When I got to the part about the memorial garden, I started crying again. Marcus did not say a word during my entire explanation. He just listened, taking notes in a small green notebook he kept in his breast pocket. His expression grew colder with each new detail. "Where are Dad's papers?" he asked finally. I led him to Robert's old home office, where I had kept all the important documents in a filing cabinet. Marcus spent the next 4 hours going through everything: the original sales contract for the house, the HOA covenant documents, every violation notice Corinne had sent. He photographed each document with his phone and made more notes in his notebook. "Mom," he said around midnight, looking up from a stack of papers, "this woman has violated about 15 different housing laws: selective enforcement, excessive fines, improper notice procedures, harassment. She has been so busy playing dictator that she forgot to follow the actual rules." "What does that mean?" I asked. Marcus smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "It means we are going to destroy her." The next morning, Marcus put on his dress uniform and went door to door in our neighborhood. Not to every house, just to specific ones he had identified from his research. He introduced himself as my son and asked if people would be willing to share their experiences with Corinne Mitchell and the HOA board. The stories that came out were horrifying. The elderly man 3 streets over who had been fined $800 because his garage door took too long to close due to a mechanical problem he could not afford to fix. The single mother who had been threatened with a lien because her children's bicycle was visible from the street. The young couple who had been forced to remove their vegetable garden because it was not aesthetically consistent with community standards. Corinne had been running a systematic campaign of intimidation and financial abuse against anyone she perceived as vulnerable. The wealthy families, the ones with connections and resources, never seemed to get violation notices. But the elderly, the single parents, the people on fixed incomes, they were constant targets. Marcus documented everything: names, dates, amounts of fines, specific violations cited. He cross-referenced Corinne's enforcement actions with the actual HOA bylaws and found dozens of instances where she had exceeded her authority or failed to follow proper procedures. "She has been operating like this place is her personal fiefdom," Marcus told me as he worked. "But HOAs are legal entities with specific rules and limitations. She does not get to make up her own laws." On his third day home, Marcus made appointments with 3 different attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. He presented his research like a military briefing, complete with charts and timelines, and documented evidence of Corinne's abuse of power. The second attorney, an older woman named Patricia Rodriguez, listened to Marcus's presentation with growing anger. "This is one of the worst cases of HOA overreach I have seen in 20 years of practice," she said. "Mrs. Mitchell has opened herself and the association to massive liability." "What can we do?" Marcus asked. "We can file complaints with the State Attorney General's office, the Better Business Bureau, and the County Housing Authority," Patricia replied. "But first, I think we should give Mrs. Mitchell a chance to resolve this voluntarily. Sometimes bullies back down when they realize they are facing someone who knows how to fight back." Marcus scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. He called Corinne's office personally to arrange it. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said in his most professional military voice, "this is Sergeant Marcus Sullivan, Janet Sullivan's son. I would like to schedule a meeting to discuss my mother's HOA compliance issues. I believe we can reach an acceptable resolution." I could hear Corinne's voice through the phone, dripping with condescension. "Certainly, Sergeant Sullivan, though I should warn you that military service does not create exemptions from community standards." Marcus smiled that cold smile again. "No, ma'am, it does not. But it does teach you how to research regulations and identify violations of proper procedure. I think you will find our meeting very educational." After he hung up, Marcus turned to me with absolute confidence. "Mom, this ends now, and she is going to regret ever messing with our family." Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of March weather that threatens snow but never delivers. I had barely slept the night before, alternating between hope and terror about what was going to happen when Corinne arrived. Marcus had been up since 5 in the morning, arranging documents on my dining room table like a military command center. He had printed maps of the neighborhood with violation patterns highlighted in different colors. He had legal statutes bookmarked in 3 different binders. He had testimony statements from 8 different neighbors, all signed and notarized. At exactly 10 o'clock, Corinne's white Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched her emerge with her usual entourage. David Chen and Patricia Williams flanked her as they walked up my front sidewalk, all 3 of them carrying portfolios and wearing the kind of serious expressions usually reserved for foreclosure proceedings. The doorbell rang. Marcus straightened his dress uniform jacket and walked to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, too nervous to watch but too invested to leave entirely. "Good morning," I heard Marcus say as he opened the door. "You must be Mrs. Mitchell. I am Sergeant Marcus Sullivan." The silence that followed was deafening. I peeked around the corner and saw Corinne's face go completely white. She had been expecting to find me, broken and desperate and ready to surrender. Instead, she was looking up at 6 feet 2 inches of Marine dress uniform and barely contained professional fury. Yes," Corinne stammered, recovering some of her composure. "We are here to discuss your mother's ongoing compliance issues." "Please come in," Marcus said, stepping aside to let them enter. His voice was polite, controlled, absolutely professional. "I have prepared a comprehensive review of my mother's situation. I think you will find it very informative." They followed him into the dining room, where Marcus had set up his presentation. Corinne's eyes widened as she took in the organized documents, the highlighted maps, the legal binders arranged with military precision. "Please have a seat," Marcus said, gesturing to the chairs he had arranged facing his document display. "Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," Corinne said stiffly. She was trying to regain control of the situation, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. "Sergeant Sullivan, while I appreciate your concern for your mother, these are community matters that fall under HOA jurisdiction." "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "Which is why I spent the last week researching HOA law, reviewing your association's bylaws, and documenting your enforcement actions against my mother and other residents." He opened the first binder and began his presentation. Speaking in clear, measured tones, Marcus laid out Corinne's violations of proper procedure: failure to provide adequate notice before imposing fines, excessive penalties that exceeded statutory limits, selective enforcement that targeted vulnerable residents while ignoring identical violations by others. "For example," Marcus said, showing photographs he had taken around the neighborhood, "Mrs. Henderson at 142 Oak Street has decorative landscaping stones identical to the ones my mother was fined for removing. Mr. Thompson at 67 Elm Street has a bird feeder in his front yard that has been there for over 2 years. Yet neither of these residents has received violation notices." Corinne's face was getting red. "Those situations are different," she said weakly. "How?" Marcus asked. "According to Section 4.2 of your own bylaws, landscaping violations should be enforced uniformly across all properties. Can you explain the criteria you used to determine that my mother's decorative stones required removal, while Mrs. Henderson's identical stones were acceptable?" Corinne had no answer. David Chen and Patricia Williams were looking increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in their chairs and avoiding eye contact. Marcus continued methodically through his evidence. Excessive fines that violated state regulations limiting HOA penalties, failure to follow proper dispute resolution procedures, harassment through daily surveillance and repeated phone calls. By the time he reached the Memorial Garden violation, Karen looked like she wanted to disappear. "This brings us to what I consider the most egregious violation of your authority," Marcus said, his voice getting harder. "Demanding the removal of my father's memorial garden. A memorial garden that violates no specific regulation in your bylaws and that you targeted purely to cause emotional distress to a grieving widow." "The landscaping standards clearly state," Karen began. "The landscaping standards," Marcus interrupted, "require that decorative elements be harmonious with community aesthetic standards. My mother's memorial garden consists of roses and a small stone marker. Roses are specifically listed as approved plantings in Appendix C of your own guidelines." He slid a copy of the HOA guidelines across the table, with the relevant section highlighted. Karen stared at it like it was a poisonous snake. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus continued, "my research has identified 43 separate violations of state HOA regulations, county housing codes, and your own association bylaws in your treatment of my mother. I have documented testimony from 8 other residents describing similar harassment campaigns. I have financial records showing a pattern of excessive fines that appear designed to force residents to sell their homes rather than comply with regulations." The room was dead silent. Karen's hands were shaking as she gripped her portfolio. "Here is what is going to happen," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a level that probably made enemy combatants surrender without a fight. "All fines against my mother will be dropped immediately. All harassment will stop immediately. The lien process will be terminated immediately. My mother will be allowed to maintain her memorial garden and any other reasonable landscaping she chooses." "And if we refuse?" Karen asked, though her voice had lost all its authority. Marcus smiled. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. "Then I file complaints with the state attorney general, the county housing authority, and the Better Business Bureau. I provide my research to a housing rights attorney who specializes in HOA abuse cases, and I make sure that every single violation of law and procedure you have committed becomes public record." Karen's face went from red to pale to green. She understood exactly what Marcus was telling her. She had built her little kingdom on illegal foundations, and now someone had shown up with the legal dynamite to bring it all crashing down. We will need to discuss this with the full board," she said weakly. "You have 24 hours," Marcus replied. "After that, I assume you have chosen legal action over voluntary compliance." They left without another word. Karen's authority shattered so completely that she could barely walk straight. I watched through my window as they stood in my driveway for 5 minutes, having what looked like a very heated discussion before driving away. Marcus turned to me with satisfaction written all over his face. "Mom, pack up Dad's memorial garden. Tomorrow we are making it bigger." The phone call came 18 hours later. Karen's voice sounded completely different, stripped of all the condescending authority that had terrorized me for months. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said quietly, "this is Karen Mitchell. The board has reviewed your son's presentation, and we have decided to resolve all outstanding issues. All fines are hereby dropped and the lien process has been terminated. We apologize for any inconvenience." Inconvenience. She called months of harassment and financial abuse an inconvenience. But I did not care anymore. It was over. Within a week, the ripple effects began. Other residents who had suffered under Corinne's reign started coming forward. Mrs. Patterson from Maple Street called to tell me she was getting her $800 in fines refunded. The young couple with the vegetable garden received written permission to replant it. Tom the mailman told me that violation notices had stopped arriving at houses throughout the neighborhood. 2 weeks later, Corinne Mitchell submitted her resignation as HOA president. The official reason given was personal commitments requiring her full attention. The real reason was that half the neighborhood had started asking questions about her enforcement practices, and the other board members realized they could be held legally liable for her actions. The new HOA president was Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who had been too afraid to speak up during Corinne's dictatorship. Her first official act was to implement a formal appeals process for all violations. Her second was to establish clear, written criteria for enforcement actions. Her third was to limit fines to amounts that actually encouraged compliance rather than financial destruction. I spent a beautiful April morning replanting my memorial garden. This time, I did not ask for permission. I planted Robert's favorite roses in a larger bed, added a small bench where I could sit and remember our life together, and installed a proper stone marker with his full name and dates. Marcus had returned to his deployment, but not before making sure I understood my rights and had contact information for 3 different attorneys who specialized in HOA law. Before he left, he helped me plant the new roses and sat with me on the memorial bench. "Dad would be proud of you, Mom," he said. "You survived something that would have broken a lot of people." "I did not survive it," I told him. "You saved me." "No," Marcus replied. "I just reminded you how to fight back. You had the strength all along." As spring turned into summer, Willowbrook Estates became the peaceful community it had always claimed to be. Neighbors started talking to each other again instead of living in fear of violation notices. Children played in yards without their parents worrying about noise disturbances. People planted gardens and hung bird feeders and put out welcome mats in whatever colors made them happy. I learned something important during those months of torment. Bullies like Corinne Mitchell thrive on isolation and fear. They choose victims who seem vulnerable and alone. But when someone stands up to them, when someone fights back with knowledge and determination, their power crumbles completely. My memorial garden is beautiful now, full of Robert's roses and peaceful memories. Sometimes I sit on the bench and think about what he would have said about the whole situation. He probably would have laughed and told me that bullies are the same everywhere, whether they are wearing military uniforms or carrying HOA clipboards. The important thing is never to let them win.